So Deadpool and Wolverine is the third Deadpool film and the first Deadpool movie to take place after Fox was acquired by Disney, and you better believe that a film this meta is going to bring it up. So, like when the acquisition of Fox by Disney happened, a lot of people assumed, like, is that going to be the end of the Deadpool movies? And it would suck if it were, because like the Deadpool movies were still going strong. Like the X-Men movies kind of limped to like an end point there, and we already had kind of the end of Hugh Jackman's arc as Logan. So where do you go with Deadpool? Because like the obvious answer is that if they're going to continue on with Deadpool, and it's going to be through Marvel Studios, is Deadpool going to interact with the Marvel Cinematic Universe? And for how meta and fourth wall breaking that Deadpool usually is, that is bound to happen. To the film's credit, for Deadpool and Wolverine, that does end up happening. But what I found more fascinating about this third Deadpool film is that it does seem more interested in kind of like playing in like your own sandbox rather than trying to change yourself and expand into the bigger one, because like pretty much all the Marvel Cinematic Universe films are all PG-13, and it's obviously something that Deadpool would not quite fit into. But I think director like Sean Levy, he finds just the right way to kind of have to make Deadpool play with this material, but also to kind of still have fun with like the lingering elements of what could have been and what felt like missed potential of the Fox era of Marvel films. So obviously, Ryan Reynolds returns as Deadpool, delivering all the usual comedic bits that we expect. Within the first few minutes, he's already like slicing up people and killing them in bizarre and absurd ways, and he's dancing to pop songs. Pretty much everything that we've come to expect from Deadpool. But what becomes more intriguing is that he feels like he doesn't fit in anymore, so he starts like jumping over to other universes and see like, hey, maybe I can fit in with like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Maybe I could be one of the Avengers. And he isn't really quite accepted into that role and feels that, maybe this is it for me. Maybe I'm not really cut out for superhero material, and maybe I just have to just hang it up and call it quits. And I have to give the film some credit to this, is that I think for how obvious they make it that Deadpool's playing around with the cinematic universe and making passive comments about how the MCU isn't as great as it used to be, and highlighting the remnants of Fox, including literally the 20th Century Fox logo as a decaying relic in the background, which I'm sure some people have seen in trailers. But there's also a little bit of, and I don't want to make it sound like a big thing, but there is a little bit of subtlety in the fact that Deadpool doesn't comment on a lot of the obvious allegory here. And it feels like he could have. It felt like he could have been oh, okay, I see. This relates to, my place in mainstream superhero cinema and how I don't really fit in. But thankfully it doesn't. And I'm almost kind of grateful for that, because then I think it allows Deadpool's story to become a little bit more personal about him wanting to fight for the existence of his own universe and try to preserve it in the face of, total oblivion, which they kind of introduce with, the introduction of the TVA to Deadpool from Loki, which the film mentions, but more or less the story is just that the people who manage the timelines want to wipe out Deadpool's universe, and he's got to try to find a way to save it. And one of the ways he thinks he can do that is by finally getting Wolverine in on the action. So all this roasting and ribbing that he's done of Hugh Jackman to finally be in one of his films, that all comes to pass in this third film. So we do finally get Wolverine interacting with Deadpool, and for how much Ryan Reynolds plays up, Hugh Jackman finally being on the screen with him, and how much he tries to amp up all the fights, and how he tries to make all these fun jokes about how they literally revived him from the dead so that he could come back to play this character again. It lives up to a lot of the hype, and And I think that like it almost like has to, like that feels like the bare minimum if you're gonna have a film where Deadpool is talking up how much he loves Wolverine and how much he's always wanted to fight alongside him or fight against him. Yeah, it's pretty cool. The fights between them all have, they go for it. They set them up well. And yeah, like just all the prep that they put into it, it pays off. Like I especially love the fight they have within entirely within a car, where where it feels more like like two people having sex in a car. The way that they just kind of keep the battle constrained to like this one area. Even when they get launched out of the car, they keep going back in and just slicing up each other in between there. So for anyone who hasn't been like keeping track of this production and is a little bit worried that Deadpool might have softened now in the era of like Disney Marvel, he hasn't. He does all the stuff you usually love. He makes tons of vulgar references. He's very violent, very gross. Very much leans into like the sexual elements that we've come to expect from the character. But also he plays around a little bit with the limitations that he has within like his own comic book movie. Like at one point they keep making a running joke out of the fact that they can't show anyone snorting cocaine, but they can talk a lot about cocaine. So a lot of the humor in this film comes from I think just what they're allowed to get away with in this film, not just in terms of like like the violence and the profanity, that much we expect, but in terms of how much it's allowed to play around with just Marvel in general, and framing what they can have in this film. Like I said, like it's more interested in stuff outside of the MCU, and it's kind of more interested in making dreams come true. Like there's a phrase they use in the film that I think perfectly encapsulates what Deadpool and Wolverine is all about, which is educated wish, because that's very much what this film feels like. It feels like an educated wish about what comic book fans would like to see in a Marvel movie, but like feels impossible either because of franchises that they've passed on, or characters that we might not see again, or proposed characters that we wouldn't see. So like I'm not going to reveal any of the cameos for anybody who hasn't watched it yet, but suffice to say there's a lot that are genuine surprises and did make the film very charming for like, oh, okay, they're actually gonna go there. To a different degree though, I think there are like a few cameos where you kind of got to remind yourself of who these characters are. Like in particular, there's one scene in which there are 4 cameos thrown at the screen, and 2 of them are interesting because like one of them is somebody returning to a role, and the other is a character who's set up to be more like comic accurate for the role. Which again, like another thing I wanted to stress too is like Deadpool does feel like it's trying to be more comic accurate, especially with Wolverine, and especially the different variants they have of Wolverine throughout. It's like okay, comic book fans, like for everything that you've wanted with Wolverine, we'll give you a little bit of it here and there, and and kind of wink at the screen that hey, we're kind of making the film that you want here. But in addition to like those 2 cameos and the 4 cameo scene, the other 2, there's like the very first one they introduced, like you kind of got to remind yourself, okay, who's this character? Because it was a film from roughly about like 20 years ago. It's like, oh, okay, I think yeah, that is it. And then there's another character who's aged up since then, who there's a little bit of like iconography they got to use with that character to remind you who they are. So yeah, there's like not all the cameos are great, but there are some genuine surprises, including some stunt casting along the way that I thought was pretty clever. And yeah, and a lot of the fights are just they're fun. Like not all of them are as well staged as I would like. I think like for like the car sequence was pretty cool, but I think like there's something about the way that it was edited that feels a little bit off, and even like scenes that are technically interesting. Like there's a great scene where Wolverine and Deadpool are killing their way through a bus, and it looks cool just because there's a lot to look at with all the choreography. But I feel like for the ending they wanted there, it kind of like slips a little with like the special effects there, and it does trip a bit into like the uncanny valley area. And there's tons of moments throughout this film, especially for like the types of characters that they want to present. There's a lot of special effects involved, and not all of them hit that well. But I think for Ryan Reynolds, who additionally like adds to the script here as a co-writer, I think for keeping the comedy very very quick and very smart and very wry about the material that it's playing with, I think the speed of it helps, to be a little bit more distracted, so you're not thinking about, like that one scene where Deadpool and Wolverine battle for the first time. And there's a clear moment where you can see like the sword kind of like clipping through him a little bit. So yeah, like there are little errors here and there, but I think like the speed and pace and humor can go a long way in making the audience, have more fun with it, rather than, be bogged down in like those nitpicky areas. And I had a lot of laughs at this film, and I thought it was a perfect ribbing for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It went some areas I didn't think it was gonna go into, and it did roast a bit harder. Like, it's not like quite in the area of satire, but it is definitely in the area where it feels like they are roasting Disney and Marvel a little bit more than one might expect from this. Like, you would think, like I said, a lot of people might think that Deadpool might have gone a little bit soft, that he wouldn't talk as much crap about Disney, but he does here and there. And I think, like, you have to. That's the character that you've sold to audiences. That's the route that you have to continue on. But I will say, there are some elements of the film that I did find a little bit lacking. I did find it a little bit concerning that, considering how much this is a film that all about Deadpool wanting to play in his own sandbox and fight for his own universe and find, camaraderie within the allies he's made throughout the past few films, they're kind of mostly left in the dust as kind of like bookends to the film, which is kind of weird. If that's like the driving force for Deadpool, it feels kind of weird that they're pushed mostly into the background, mostly for observation. They do kind of weave one character into the climax, which I thought was kind of cute and clever, but for the most part, a lot of the returning characters are just kind of pushed to the background because Deadpool is more interested in playing with, his own little, like I said, his own little Marvel universe, with all the possibilities that he can have with it, which is fun. I get it. It's great. But for a film that really wants to focus on the emotional heart and give like Deadpool more of a personal drive, so he's not just a clown, so you do feel a little bit more for him as the story goes along, I felt like it could have used a bit more involvement from the other characters, like like Cyclops and Nega, and his blind roommate. That, like, there needed to be a little bit more of them thrown into the mix, I think, in order to make that personal story and that willingness to fight for more than just yourself resonate a bit more. But of course, I'm sure for like a lot of comic book fans, these are like minor nitpicks, because the primary reason you're coming to this film is to hear Deadpool deliver all his funny and, wry quips along the way and fight Wolverine. And you do get a lot of that. And it is really good. So it's hard to like fault the film, I guess, for, delivering on that educated wish. So, despite these flaws, and I do think they are flaws worth considering if they do decide to return to Deadpool again, which, it kind of remains up in the air. In fact, they kind of leave it up in the air at the end, whether or not Disney's going to pursue anything that like Fox has done with Marvel. I was almost surprised at how much subtlety there was in kind of like the winking of saying like, could we save these characters? We might, it's, he doesn't quite say, but he indirectly says, well, it's up to the studio what they want to do at this point. But hey, who knows? We threw it out there, and we had fun. And I do gotta say, it was very refreshing and fun to have a film that doesn't just feel like it's just doing crossovers for the sake of future films or setting up events that could happen in future films. There's a minor tease if like you peer in the background about like what might happen in a future film, but outside of that, there's no like post-credit scene where Deadpool will return and like Avengers Doomsday. There's nothing like that, which I gotta admit was really really nice to have. And actually, like I was actually surprised that like the post-credit scene was still pretty funny. And the reason that it's funny is that it's because it's building on what was already present in this film rather than focus on what's next on the horizon, what's going to be in the future of Deadpool, what's going to be the future for Deadpool within the MCU. It's not that interesting. I'm more interested in what Deadpool is doing now, especially since this film is more or less, I don't know how much of a spoiler this is, but it's more or less an ode to the Fox era, which, you know, I don't want to put on like nostalgic glasses here, but a lot of the Fox era was not that good. There are some X-Men films I loved. I really loved what they set up with X-Men. I did love Hugh Jackman returning to all these films, but not all the X-Men films were great. And they definitely ended on a limp note. A lot of the other like franchises, like, you know, just kind of, you know, we're not that good in general. There's a few highlights along the way, you know, stuff like, you know, like Blade 2, and part of me is still a little bit nostalgic for Daredevil, even though most of it really didn't work for me, but like I go back every now and then, I was like, okay, you know, parts kind of work here and there. But I mean, it's more or less just realizing, yeah, that this era is over, so why don't we just celebrate? And that's basically what Deadpool and Wolverine ends up being. It ends up being a party for a previous era of Marvel, and delivering on a few dreams that others might have had that never quite came to pass. So on that level, it's a pretty fun comic book movie. It's not. I don't know if I don't know. It might be up in my top picks, but it's hard to say. But as it stands, just for delivering what it promised, for Deadpool and Wolverine fighting and bickering with each other, it delivered on those merits, and for that, it's fun. It's a fun comic book movie that gives the MCU the roasting that it desperately needs.